Thank you. I've got one quick announcement. Annette, wife of Joseph Janocha, one of the men in the Camden, New Jersey Diocese Formation Program, went home to the Lord this morning. Please keep the family in prayer. Annette is her name. I don't know how to pronounce the last name, so I said Janocha. Deacon Chris Anderson was ordained a deacon for the Archdiocese of Portland in 1997 and serves at St. Mary's Parish in Corvallis and the Oregon State University Newman Center. He also is a professor of English at Oregon State. A poet and essayist, he has published a number of books. His most recent, Light When It Comes, Trusting Joy, Facing Darkness, and Seeing God in Everything, was published in 2016. He and his wife Barb, the pastoral associate at St. Mary's, have 3 grown children. They live on the edge of the forest north of Corvallis. So please, once again, give a NDICE welcome to our presenter, Deacon Chris Anderson.
I thought Deacon Bill was just terrific. I'd not heard him before. He was wonderful. I thought all the talks have been just very, very fine. So I'm very honored to be here, and I want to thank Deacon Paul for doing all this copying for me. I hadn't thought. I just thought I'll ask you to make some copies for me, and I knew there'd be a lot of people here, but I didn't realize how heavy the box would be or how much effort it would take. I'd like to start. I mean, we're at the sort of end of this, and I don't know about you, but I'm getting a little tired of sitting. And so I'd like you to stand, if you would stand, please. And I would like you to turn to somebody next to you, ideally not your spouse. Well, that wasn't all I was going to ask you to do. Now, when I say go, I'm going to give you a topic to talk about. And I'm going to give you 2 minutes to talk. And when I say go, the person whose first name is first in the alphabet, talks first. And you have 2 minutes to talk. If you run out of things to say, there's just silence because the listener can only listen. You can't say anything in response. You just have to listen. So if there's silence for 2 minutes, you can just look into each other's eyes or hold hands. And then when I say switch, the talker becomes the listener and the listener becomes the talker. All right? So the first person to talk is the person whose first name is first in the alphabet. You talk for 2 minutes. Listener, just listen. You don't have to say anything, and you can't say anything. And the person talking, you have this time to talk. And here's the topic. I want you to just talk about what's in your mind right now. Is it lunch? Is it getting home? Is it, what happened to my cell phone? Is it internal and external form? Whatever it is. So you have 2 minutes to give a movie of your mind right now. And please keep your voices low because there are a lot of people here. Okay? Starting now. Okay, switch. Okay, that's good. That'll get us warmed up. If I can ask you to please take your seats. We're going to be doing this a couple of more times. So remember how it works. It's a little harder than it might seem. Although this group doesn't seem to have a lot of trouble talking, I've discovered. I don't know how often it is that we have a chance to be listened to, or how often we have a chance to listen and not to try to think of what we need to say in reply. A few months ago, I read the wrong gospel at Mass, at Sunday Mass. Has anybody else here done that? I've been at, yeah. What's wrong with you people? I've been a deacon for almost 20 years, and I read the wrong gospel. I was prepared. I had read the gospel at home and thought about it, but it was really hectic right before Mass, and everybody was running around. I don't know why they call it organized religion. And we were just chaotic, and I didn't have a chance to look at the gospel book, and all three readings, A, B, and C, the cycle, the choices, were from John, from the same part of the farewell discourse in John. And I got up there, and I was about 3 lines in, and I thought, oh my God, I am reading the wrong gospel. And I could tell that quite a few people in church knew that. They prepare too. And I could tell you my pastor was not too happy about it because he was preaching that day, and he had prepared the homily on what we like to think of as the right gospel. And I just panicked. I was just flummoxed. I just froze. And looking back on it now, I think one of the reasons that I didn't start over again is that I didn't want to make even more of a fool out of myself. I think there was, in some kind of reptilian, instinctive way, I was trying to get through it with my dignity intact. And so I just read the wrong gospel. And at the sign of peace, the other deacon and I, my brother Deacon Michael Syak, we were over at the tabernacle getting ready to bring the Blessed Sacrament up to the altar. And I said, Mike, I read the wrong gospel. And he said, I know. And he said, did you thank Jesus? Did you thank Jesus? And he wasn't being sarcastic. Well, he was being a little bit sarcastic. But that really brought me up short. That really brought me up short in a good way. And suddenly I calmed down. And in a way, that's what I want to say. We've been talking throughout the conference about how we have to live with imperfection. All of us have gone to that part of this document, that we're always in the process of becoming perfect. We're not perfect yet. And there's a way in which we just have to live with that. But my point will be that in a way, we have to celebrate that. How do we live good Christian lives? By realizing we can't. At least not on our own, only through grace. And so we thank Jesus for our imperfections. I teach English at Oregon State. I have for over 30 years, and I've been a deacon, as I say, for almost 20 this November, and one of my great honors and privileges has been to marry a number of my former students. And a few years ago, one of my students asked me if I would witness her marriage, and I said I would be honored to do it. Corvallis is about 75 miles south of Portland, Oregon, and this wedding was at St. Matthew's in Hillsboro, which is a suburb of Portland. And I didn't know the church very well, so I drove up there, and this student was a student with really high control needs. She was really, shall we say, detail-oriented, unlike most of my students. And she really wanted to get things right. She was really nervous. And her mother was even worse. Those of you who've done lots of weddings, it's the mother of the bride that you pay attention to most of the time. And they were really concerned. And I kept saying to them as we emailed and talked on the phone, don't worry, I've done millions of these. I'm a pro. Everything's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. But the problem at St. Matthew's Church is that instead of the ambo being on the floor of the sanctuary the way God intended it to be, the way it is at St. Mary's in Corvallis, it was up 3 steps. So you have to walk up 3 steps, kind of like this, to get to the ambo. And, you know, I knew that. And this bride was just so panicked, and I was relaxed. And so I get up, and I read the gospel, and I step like this to put the gospel book to the side so I get my homily, and I step out into the air. I mean, my feet went straight up into the air. I mean, I grabbed a hold of the ambo. I mean, it was not a little fall. It was a big fall. I fell off the ambo. And there were 6 or 7 cameras there, you know, filming this. And when I was doing the vows, you know, I was trying to keep from laughing. And the bride's eyes were like this. And I am her wedding memory. One of the Desert Fathers was asked, and this is the first quote on the handout, what do you do in the monastery all day? We fall and get up. We fall and get up. We fall and get up again. How do we live good Christian lives? By realizing we can't. We never get better, we just get better at not getting better. By falling and admitting we have fallen, and then laughing at ourselves. By thanking Jesus for our problems, by realizing that all of our trials and all of our failures are occasions for grace because they teach us our need for grace. Dear imperfections. Again, we see the word imperfect in canon law. We see the word imperfect in this great document, The Joy of Love, and we panic. None of us like imperfection, even though it's all around us. Maybe that's why, or it's inside of us. But the great Francis de Sales, that gentle post-Reformation saint, he says, dear imperfections, they give us practice in humility. That's all I'm trying to say. I mean, I think I shouldn't fall off the altar. I think I should read the right gospel. I think it's very important for deacons to know what they're doing. But however hard we try, we're going to make mistakes, and that applies to being a father. That applies to being a mother. That applies to being a son or a daughter or a brother or a sister. This image is, we saw this last summer in the Vatican Museum. It's a clay model for the Bernini statues in St. Peter's. I think it's in the Blessed Sacrament Chapel. And they're beautiful, but I like these even better. This is an image of what I want to talk about. That in a sense, we're all angels, but we've got wires sticking out. We're a model for this. Maybe that's a way of giving you an image of what gradualism is. Dorothy Day, one of my heroines. I think somebody who will be a great saint in the church. There's a wonderful new memoir about Dorothy Day by her granddaughter, Kate Hennessy, that I really recommend, called The World Will Be Saved by Beauty. And Dorothy Day, I admire her so much because of the way she sacrificed for the poor. You know, she founded the Catholic Workers' Houses and movement and lived with the poor and did this work. She didn't just talk about it, she did it. And I think of her with such admiration. And here's a journal entry. Her journals and diaries are interesting. They were published under the title, The Duty of Delight. And she says this, and I think she's in her 60s when she says this. And more, I like reading people who are older than 60. I need to overcome a sense of my own impotence, my own failure, and impatience with others that goes with it. Such a sense of defeat comes from expecting too much of oneself, also from a sense of pride. More and more I realize how good God is to me. See, that's the turn. How good God is to me to send me discouragements, failures, antagonisms. The only way to proceed is to remember that God's ways are not our ways. See, there's something liberating about it. It's not, oh my God, I'm so terrible, I fell off the altar. Oh, I read the gospel. No. We're sort of laughing at ourselves, letting go of our illusions, saying, God is here. God is with me. This isn't about me. It's what Deacon Bill was saying in a very different way. It's what Deacon Greg was saying. It's what Father Brady was saying. It's what the bishop was saying, all in our different ways. Because it's what the church is saying, and it's what Jesus is saying. Jesus never condemns sinners. He condemns people who don't think they are. The only way to proceed is to remember God's ways are not our ways, to bear our own burdens, to do our own work as best we can, and not fret because we cannot do more or do another's work. And I think this is true not just at the Catholic Worker, and not just in a monastery or a seminary, not just for priests and religious, or for deacons in their role as deacons, but in the family too. I think this is really true in the family, because in a family, we have to embrace the ordinary. We have to embrace the everyday. We have to. That's what a family is about. There's this whole tradition of the value of desolation in the life of faith. You know, there's consolation and there's desolation. We only want consolation, but that's not how it works. As Deacon Bill kept saying, life is messy. And when you read deeper into the mystical tradition, in particular, the contemplatives, like Teresa of Avila, for example, St. John of the Cross, there's a sense that desolation is itself a gift. It's a gift we don't always like, but it's a gift nonetheless. It's a sign of grace. That what seems to be the absence of God is really God. And I think if that's true in a monastery, it's even more true in the family. What is holy about the family? That sometimes it's desolate. The family is holy because maybe better than anything else, it can teach us desolation. Now, sitting down this time, I'd like to do another listening pairs. Let me tell you what the topic is, and then I'll pair you up. And again, you're just listening. This time I'm going to give you 3 minutes. I'd like you to think about a time when you fell down. Maybe literally, that might be fun to think about. And how it felt, what the occasion of it was. I'm not the only person to have fallen down. Or if you can't think of a time when you literally fell down, maybe figuratively fell down. All right? So just sitting down now, let's not stand for now. Ideally, could you turn to somebody else, somebody you didn't share with the first time? Paul, you're going to have a hard time. Some of you are at tables by yourself. Come on, you got to go find a partner. Okay, and I get to start you. The person whose name is first in the alphabet. You can't start talking yet. You're just like my students. Find a partner. If there's anybody left over, she has to leave the room, I guess. You have to have even. Okay, the person who is alphabetically first will start. You have 3 minutes now to talk. If you run out of things to say, if you start talking on another topic, you just had 3 minutes, it's yours. And the other person, you can't. You can smile. You can't make any little noises or guffaws or anything. You just listen, and then when I say switch, you switch. A time you fell. Now. Switch. Okay. All right. I think my work here is done. You know, one of the images that I love from the liturgy is when the deacon receives the gifts. People bring the bread and the wine, symbolizing their work, their life from the week, and we bring them to the altar, and they are blessed. They are transformed. They are revealed as what they always already were. And that's, in a sense, what I think we do when we preach as deacons, too, is that we're bringing the stories of the people. We're trying to listen to the stories of the people. We're just trying to hear them and bring them back. This is the first story in this new book of mine. It's not exactly a story of making a mistake, but it's a story, I think, to me, the heart of Amoris Laetitia is this idea of reality, of this concrete world that our Lord came into and that he invites us into. So this is the first story. I am called to bless a bathroom. A young poet has committed suicide there. Her boyfriend found her and tried to revive her. He was soaked with blood when the EMTs arrived and then the police. And though he's moved out now, and the biological hazard team has scrubbed the blood away, the landlord and the boyfriend's father want some kind of further cleansing, maybe a kind of magic. But who am I to say? So I drive to the complex, a warren of condominiums, chalky and cheap, and I wander around until I find theirs, and I knock on the door and introduce myself to the parents, 50s, disheveled in dirty sweatshirts and jeans, and they take me down the hall, past boxes and piles of clothes. The condo is new, the bathroom small and bright. I squeeze in by the toilet, stand against the wall, facing the mirror, and say the prayers for the dead and the blessing for a house, my voice echoing, and with a small plastic bottle begin to sprinkle the room with holy water, the vanity, the mirror, the clean fiberglass tub. Perpetual light shine upon her, O Lord, amen. The boyfriend couldn't bear to come. His mother and father stand in the doorway, bowing their heads. And as I wave the bottle and say the words, the cap flies off. It pops, bouncing into the bottom of the tub. And I have to lean over to get it, picking it up off the slick, shiny surface of the fiberglass. May she rest in peace, I say, embarrassed now, but alert too, aware. The words as they echo in that hollow place sound good to me and proper and true. May the souls of all the faithful departed through the mercy of God rest in peace. Then I turn, trace the cross in the air, and give the final blessing. In my left hand, the cap, about the size of a dime with a hole in the middle, like the prize in a box of Cracker Jacks, a whistle, or a top. We all have moments like this, don't we? One other very brief moment. I go to visit our old sacristan, who always used to dress to the nines. Tweed skirts, silver hair just so. But now she has lost her mind. She is demented. And I go over to the assisted care facility to bring her communion, carrying the consecrated host in a small silver pyx. She welcomes me formally. Won't you please sit, she says, then calmly peels off her house dress over her head like a girl, right there in front of me. and stands before her closet in her slip, deciding what to wear. I had brought Christ into that room. She knew she had to change. I think this is the heart of the joy of love, this wonderful quote. And the other speakers have kind of read around it. At times we are proposed, Pope Francis says, a far too abstract. He said, I'm a poet, I'm a storyteller, I'm an English teacher. That's another way into the church, is through story, through image, through symbol. You know, the Eucharist is a poem we live inside of. We get inside of the poem that is true. So we get too far from the concrete, he says. The practical possibilities of real families. And here's the sentence I want to emphasize. This excessive idealization, especially when we have failed to inspire trust in God's grace, is not help to make marriage more desirable and attractive, but quite the opposite. This is the problem. This is the key. Excessive idealization. A superficial understanding of the church's real teaching. A superficial understanding of the Holy Family, really, as a model, and of Mary in particular. That's underneath Amoris Laetitia, I think, is the Holy Family. Being patient, the Pope goes on to say a little bit later, does not mean letting ourselves being constantly mistreated, tolerating physical aggression, or allowing other people to use us. We encounter problems, and this is what I put in bold for myself, whenever we think that relationships or people ought to be perfect, or when we put ourselves as the center and expect things to turn out our way. And then he talks about patience, not my greatest virtue. My daughter is very wise. She's now in her 30s, and she said, Dad, you wrote a book about joy. My book is about joy. Which would be as improbable as me writing a book about patience. Patience means facing reality and embracing complexity. Patience means humility, recognizing that we don't have the answers in that moment. Patience means trust in God's mysterious tenderness over time. We try to accept our own imperfections. We do better. We try to do better. We do all that we can to exercise all the Christian virtues. But we realize we'll never get there. And so we accept the imperfections of others. When in doubt, the great poet and writing teacher William Stafford said, when in doubt, lower your standards. I'm a writing teacher too, and students, they're writing for the ages every time they put a pen to the page. They're trying to get it perfect. Don't do that. Write badly. Let it go. When in doubt, lower your standards. And in a way, that's the opposite of what we feel as Catholics. We have very high standards because our standard is Christ. But there's another sense in which we have to recognize our own finiteness. This is, for me, the real meaning of the Holy Family as a model. I have this wonderful image here from John Collier. Have you seen this? John Collier is an American painter. I think he's from Dallas, Texas, although I don't know where he lives. And this is Mary as a bobby soxer. And about the age, we think of Our Lady, there's so much wonderful art about Our Lady, of course. We cherish that. She's not described in those wonderfully condensed and minimalist stories in Scripture. So we think of her in different ways, and we fill in the gaps, and we have all this art. But this, I think, helps us to see Mary in a more sort of realistic setting, in a suburb. And the angel there, and look at the look on her face. She's holding a book, as Mary often is in these paintings. She's, what is this? She's startled by it. I saw this image. Have you seen this? It's in the Uffizi in Florence. It's Martini's Annunciations from the 15th century. I love this one too. And partly, I think this is just the style of Martini, but she's holding a book. And notice she looks a little irritated. You know, I'm a convert to Catholicism. I became Catholic because I was second chair clarinet in the band, and there was this drummer wearing a yellow miniskirt. She had long red hair. And I liked her very much from the beginning, and now we've been married 41 years. And she was Catholic, and I became Catholic, and I went to Gonzaga. This was in high school when I first met her, but then I went to Gonzaga University in Spokane before we had a basketball team. Well, we had a basketball team, but nobody cared. And I became Catholic, and I went to the Jesuit, Father Peter Ely, a wonderful man, still a very close friend of mine, who had taught several courses, but I took a course from him in atheism. And I went to him because I was one of those campus existentialists, you know, those kind of philosophers. And he gave me the Dutch Catechism, which I think has been banned now, hasn't it? And I would say to him, we would just meet. I didn't go through our CIA or anything like that. And I'd say, I don't understand the Pope. And he would say, don't worry about that. I don't understand the saints. Don't worry about that. I don't understand Mary. Don't worry about that. And then we had my first Mass in the living room of, this was Jesuit College in 1977 on Pentecost when I became Catholic, in the living room of the house where we were house sitting for a professor. And, you know, it wasn't until the day after I was ordained a deacon that I had ever prayed the rosary. And I got called to the funeral home to lead a rosary. Now, there's some advantages to that. There are some advantages to that. I thought, wow, the rosary, what a great thing. Who would have thought? Why didn't anybody tell me about the rosary? Yeah, don't worry about it. It was wonderful, and it's become such an important part of my, but I don't have any negative, a lot of people have negative associations with the rosary. I thought, wow, it's fantastic. But one of those things I never understood was the Immaculate Conception. I accepted it as part of the teaching of the church. Part of what I think my Jesuit mentor was telling me very wisely was, you don't have to understand everything. You're following your heart. And this is all there. It will be there for you. And other people will fill in, and you see what you see, and you will grow and change. And he wasn't minimizing it, really. And the Immaculate Conception, but then I was doing a retreat recently, this last December, and part of the retreat fell on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. And so it was my chance to sort of think about it. And I was like the rosary. I thought, wow, what a great thing, the Immaculate Conception. Who knew? Why didn't anybody tell me about this? If you actually look at the document, and this is on the third page, third page, of the handout from Pope Pius IX, this is the original proclamation. Mary was, from the first moment of her conception, by the singular grace and privilege of Almighty God, and in view of the merits of Jesus Christ, the Savior of the human race, preserved free from the stain of original sin. This is the way it is with church doctrines and with the catechism. Whenever you really look at the text, it's always liberating. It's about mercy. It's about mystery. Flannery O'Connor defined dogma as the gateway to mystery. And here's what's so interesting about this, is that Mary doesn't receive grace because she was already perfect. She didn't receive grace because she was without sin through her own merits. It was given to her from birth, before she had a chance to earn it in any way. Mary's only different from us in degree, not in kind. She's hugely different in degree, but not in kind. She is saved by her Son. Before his birth, she is saved through the grace of Jesus Christ, as we are saved through the grace of Jesus Christ. The traditional image for Mary is that she is the moon, not the sun. She's not the origin of grace, she's the receptacle of grace. She's the mirror, not the lamp, and so are we. And her life was not immune from suffering. The great theologian Elizabeth Johnson, one of the great Catholic theologians writing today, says this: in her commentary on the Immaculate Conception in the Encyclopedia of Catholicism, the religious meaning of this doctrine, dogma, centers on the victory of God's grace freely given in Christ. Right, when we pray the rosary, we say at the end, in the final prayer, may we imitate what they contain, these mysteries, and obtain what they promise. That Mary's pointing to her son, but she's also a model for us. No, we're not like Mary, but yes, we are. That God generously graces Mary, of course, Mary on the other side of Eve, enabling her living union with God from her beginning, even while not removing her from the sufferings of history, signifies the good news that for the church and for every human being, grace is more original than sin. It's about grace. It's about us. If Mary's not about us, then I think people misunderstand that somehow, and this is so important, because if Mary and the Holy Family, if they're just an idealized image, then we can't possibly take it seriously. Or if we take it seriously, we can't possibly live up to it. It's just pie in the sky. And notice what Johnson says, that she's not immune from suffering. I mean, like Jesus too. He was human too. She is a young woman. She is an unwed teenager. Let me go back to an unwed pregnant teenager. She's poor. She flees from violence. This is an image of the flight to Egypt. It's in the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi. It's Giotto. I love those little angels in the corners, like they're kind of again, I think it's just the style, but they're waving at Mary. But they're fleeing from the massacre of the innocents. She's a refugee. And then 12 years later, her son is lost for 3 days. And when she finds him, she and her husband find him. He's discoursing with the rabbis in the temple, and he says, I'm in my Father's house. I'm about my Father's business. And they do not understand. I mean, we're exactly like Mary. I don't understand. And she watches him be crucified. The sword does pierce her heart, as she was told. She watches him suffer. There are the sorrowful mysteries too, and we can't skip over them. I mean, I don't want to spoil it for you, but Jesus does all these miracles, and he walks on water, and he calms the storm, and he heals the blind. He raises Lazarus from the dead. He preaches the Beatitudes, one of the most glorious things ever written. And they kill him anyway. The Jesuit Daniel Berrigan said, if you really want to follow Christ, you better look good on wood. It's funny what we take literally and what we don't take literally. Blessed are the persecuted. I don't feel blessed when I'm persecuted. This all relates to family, because where else are we persecuted more profoundly? I'm not being flip in some ways. Or we experience loss and limitation. Where else do we experience the cross? Yes, there's joy. Joy is a complicated word. Joy doesn't just mean gladness in the theological sense. C.S. Lewis says in his great book, Surprised by Joy, the joy is as much about grief. We can feel like grief. Joy is not happiness. It's distinct from happiness. In joy, we experience a longing for something that we don't have, that we only glimpse. This is also in the Basilica of St. Francis, Giotto's great image of the crucifixion. Divine love meets us in the real world. I'm coming up on 45 minutes here. We're going to continue this in the next session. This is Ruth Burroughs, the great Dominican Carmelite nun in England now. She's in her 80s, so she's even better than Dorothy Day in her 60s. In this moment, in this circumstance, painful and humiliating though it may be, and this person, in the daily unexciting round of seeming trivialities which afford no measure of self-glorification, divine love meets us here in our flawed, human, suffering human condition. and nowhere else. Final story before we conclude. I was late for Mass. This was a number of years ago. I was preaching. We live about 8 miles north of town, and my daughter was the one who was making me late. She was 15 then, before her driver's license. And I was just furious at her. We got into the car, and I'm screaming down the highway, and I'm screaming at her because she's made me late. All the way down into town, I'm just yelling at her. I've just lost my temper. And so we fly into the church, and I go into the sacristy. It's like 1 minute before. And I throw on my alb and my stole, and I process up, and I read the gospel, and I look up, and I see Maggie, and I think, there goes her faith. There goes her faith. And what did I do? I made it worse. I apologized to her from the pulpit. How do we encourage families? How do we encourage our own families? How, as deacons, do we encourage families? By preaching, by boasting of our weakness. And I'm not making that up, that's St. Paul. By admitting our mistakes and in admitting them, calling our children and our parish to grace, to a more complicated sense of the world the way it really is. We have to teach our kids this too, to face the darkness, and that's hard in this culture. They did a study recently. They asked a group of people, what would they rather have, a broken smartphone or a broken bone in their body? A broken smartphone or a broken bone in their bodies? 47% said broken bone. When I asked my students this, they said, which bone? A few years ago, about 10, 15, how long have cell phones been around? And 10 years or something? And they did a study before this of the average attention span of a human being, 12 seconds. They did a study just this last year, the average attention span, it's 8 seconds. And what's interesting about that is that they've studied the attention span of a goldfish. They can do this. They hold something up in front of the attention span of a goldfish is 9 seconds. And this isn't just our kids. This is you and me. I'm not the only one who's been on his smartphone or on his laptop sitting here. We don't want to face, even for a moment, this kind of emptiness. Or, on average, we spend 3 hours a day on our smartphones. We pick them up 47 times. There's even an app you can get to measure how often you use your cell phone. But we have to, part of what I'm suggesting is how do we teach this joy with a sense of our limitations, a sense of humor, a sense of release, a sense of, yeah, here I am, God, I couldn't find a parking place again, and give me a parking place, and I know that's stupid, but that's the best I can do. Again and again and again, here I am, Lord, just the way I am. To face our own darkness, not to turn away, not to swipe the screen, but to actually live, to sit with that emptiness inside of us. Final quote for this session. To enter into the mystery, Maya Angelou says, I'm always amazed when people walk up and say I'm a Christian. I always think, already? Got it? Goodness gracious, lucky you. That's gradualism in a nutshell. But this is Pope Francis in an interview right after he became Pope. To enter into the mystery, we need humility, the lowliness to abase ourselves, to come down from the pedestal of our I, which is so proud of our presumption. The humility not to take ourselves so seriously, recognizing who we really are, creatures with strengths and weaknesses, sinners in need of forgiveness. To enter into the mystery, we need the lowliness that is powerlessness, the renunciation of our idols. So let's take, people are thinking about lunch now, I'm almost 100% sure. On my smartphone, I know I've gone 49 minutes, so. My first pastor used to say, good homily, Chris, 8 minutes.
Thank you, Chris, and I especially want to thank you for having me listen to my wife for 6 minutes or whatever it was directly.
We don't normally listen for that long, do we?
No. There's the old story of the man came home and says, I haven't talked to my wife in 3 weeks. She doesn't like to be interrupted. Lunch is at 12:30. Back here at 1:45 for our final conference in this room. So 1:45, be back. Good job. Well
Thank
done.
you. Not too long, I hope.
I'm going to add one other little tidbit of Paul's. He also says, I never knew what happiness was till I got married, and then it was too late.